Welcome back to our study on 1 John chapter 2, 1 through 2, called the Propitiation for Sin. Today we're looking at our study called Don't Sin. In John's very clear and succinct language, John says that the reason for his writing is that the recipients would not sin. Is he teaching that Christians can be entirely without sin? If you were to rip this out of context, then you can get this verse to say that. Yet we've already studied the beginning of this letter. If we're to assume that John is teaching Christian perfection in this life, then what is the meaning of verse 1 or chapter 1, verse 8? We say we have no sin, we deceive ourselves. What is the meaning of this next sentence? But if anyone does sin, clearly John is not contradicting himself. John's desire is that his fellow believers would be free from sin. Yet in reality, we still do sin. This is taught by Paul in the book of Romans chapter 7, where he says, "So I find it to be a law that when I want to do right, evil lies close at hand. For I delight in the law of God in my inner being, but I see in my members another law waging war against the law of my mind, making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members. Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death?" Paul is describing in more detail what John states in a simple phrase. For the regenerate Christian, their soul loves, delights in God's law and hates sin, but the flesh, the body of death they live in, is still held captive to the law of sin. There's a war being waged. The Christian does not desire sin in his soul, but his flesh still does. Now later in John's letter, he will return to this idea. So we won't go into great detail here, but I want to point out to you it now for reference. Look at 1 John 3, 4 through 10. The idea is not that a Christian can never sin or that they can achieve such spiritual acumen that they reach a level of perfection this side of heaven. If that's the case, why do we need an advocate and propitiation, as he says in the text we have right here? What John is speaking of is making a practice of lawlessness or sin. Christian practices righteousness, which means if he does sin, he confesses, he's repentant. Confession and repentance are works of righteousness, which show that they are abiding in Jesus. Christians are not to allow themselves to partake in sin, but are to keep themselves from it. So the little children have been written to so that they may not sin. But, as I've already mentioned, the thought does not stop there. If he just stopped there, we'd be in trouble. But he continues on, and he gives us the good news. Because as soon as he says, Christians, little children, I'm writing to you so you may not sin, there's a problem. Because, they sinned again, and they need help. So that's what we're going to talk about next time, is the helper, the advocate, the paraclete.